All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedules, your lives to participate tonight in the virtual talk on technology and mental health. I know that there's a lot going on in the world right now, and many of us are consumed with that. So I do appreciate you taking the time out to be with me tonight. A little bit about me. My name is Orson Morrison. I'm a clinical psychologist. I am the director of DePaul Family and Community Services. We are a community mental health center that is housed at DePaul University on the Lincoln Park campus. We're mostly a pediatric and family clinic, providing a full array of behavioral health services for kids and families. We provide individual therapy, family therapy, group therapy, psychological and neuropsychological assessments, and we have a number of school-based partnerships all around the city of Chicago and in some suburban communities like Oak Park. I'm also an Oak Park resident, a longtime Oak Park resident. I have two boys, ages 11 and 13, who are D97 students. So I also bring my experience as a parent to these conversations on mental health and technology. They are certainly teaching me a lot about technology, that's for sure. Little bit about our newest partnership with D97. Last year we applied for a grant. An RFP was put out by the Oak Park Township Community Mental Health Board, asking providers in the community to propose support services for youth who are struggling with anxiety, depression, executive functioning issues. And DePaul put a proposal that has sort of multiple services. First, we are providing these community talks as a way to equip adults, mostly parents and teachers, with the skills, with the language, with the understanding of various mental health topics so that we can best support our kids. Students, of course, are always welcome to attend these as well. And we are doing some presentations in the school setting to give students as well some exposure to these concepts. We're also offering school-based groups. We're offering mindfulness-based cognitive therapy groups in the school setting for kids that are showing signs and symptoms of anxiety, depression, and struggles with executive functioning. So we've been doing that this past year. Of course, when COVID-19 hit, we transitioned all of that to telehealth. So we've been doing those groups virtually for the kids at both Julian and Brooks Middle School. We have been funded again for the next school year, so we will be back to deliver those group services in the fall. And we're also providing individual and family therapy in the school setting and in home settings. There are various ways to access the services. Of course, again, the groups, because it's the end of the school year, are coming to an end, but again, we'll pick up in the fall. There are several referral forms. There's a parent referral form, a student referral form. Staff at both schools can also make referrals. And all of those referrals go to a centralized team at each of the middle schools. We meet together, discuss all the referrals, and decide as a team which services might be best for that particular child. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about our services. Your school principals or social workers can also be a resource. So in moving on to the topic of mental health and technology, it's no surprise that these are very hot topics in the media. So we've seen a lot of popular media sort of sounding the alarm on the impact of technology, particularly social media, on youth mental health. We've seen lots and lots of concern by researchers, by clinicians and parents about how is technology impacting our kids' development. I'm going to get into this a little later in the presentation, but in terms of the research, we really don't know if there's a causal connection between access to technology or use of technology and increased risk for mental health issues. The data that we have currently is what we call correlational data. So as we've seen kids' access to devices and technology and social media increase, we have also seen increase in the rates of certain mental health conditions like depression and anxiety. So it is at this point correlational. It's very hard in social science research to determine a causal relationship, just because of sort of the ethical issues around applying a particular condition on a child and then kind of studying that. So before we get too deeply into the conversation on technology, I always like to start with just a brief review of some of the developmental milestones and tasks of childhood and adolescence. It sort of helps me as a parent, as a clinician too, to understand how technology might be impacting my children. So we know that kids are going through a lot of development, physically, cognitively, emotionally. Physically, younger kids are learning how to master their motor movements, fine and gross motor control, how to tie their shoelaces, how to climb and jump and walk. And so applying sort of that understanding or that knowledge that kids at that age are developing in that way. Imagine a child who is spending, several hours on technology, right? And they're not practicing those fine or gross motor skills that they're needing to master developmentally. So you can imagine that may impact the development of those skills. Puberty, hormones, body changes as kids enter the early teen years. Cognitively, kids who are young, they're learning what's called mental representation or symbolism. They're learning how to sort of hold in their minds images or representations or ideas or concepts. If mom leaves the room, they're learning how to sort of hold the idea that, okay, she's just in the other room, she will be coming back. Older kids, they're getting a little bit more complex in terms of their processing skills. They're learning how to step back and look at the big picture. They're learning how to reason complexly, to apply hypothetical thinking, logical, abstract, creative thinking, particularly in the teen years. And so we need to be asking ourselves, is technology helping or hindering these really important developmental skills? Socially, younger kids are learning how to just be with other kids. They're learning how to share, take turns, to play cooperatively. Older kids are learning empathy. They're learning how to put their selves in the shoes of another child, to understand that this child may be experiencing something different, to take perspectives. Teenagers are learning how to form their identities. Who am I in relation to my parents, my peer group? Where do I belong? They're exploring issues like sexuality and intimacy. So again, applying technology and the knowledge that we know kids are spending more and more time online and with technology, how is it all impacting the development of these particular skills and developmental tasks? Emotionally and behaviorally, younger kids are in this phase of attachment, right? And they're relying on adults and caregivers very, very much in order to help them regulate, help them to understand their emotions. You know, parents help name emotions. You must be feeling angry today. You look really sad. They're helping children label their emotions. As kids get older, they're learning how to tolerate their emotions, how to sit with their emotions, how to delay gratification. If a child sees a plate of cookies on the counter that mom or dad just made, being able to resist the impulse to grab a cookie. And as you know, kids go into those teen years, there's a lot of, again, emotionality around identity assertion, asserting who they are, making their own decisions, etc. The other area that I think is really important to talk about is the research on play and development. And that's actually an area of research that's been really, really well documented. There's really profound benefits with play. Play helps, you know, children relax. First of all, there's so many senses, sensory systems, touch, sight, smell, that is involved in play, and it really helps kids regulate, and it creates this environment where they're learning and mastering skills at a much more robust way. Play is also really intrinsically interesting and motivating, so it keeps kids focused. It keeps kids attending to what they're doing, and that's really the best way to learn. You know, how to strengthen your attentional skills, your emotional regulation skills, your you know, interactions with other people, whether it be peers or other adults that you might be playing with. And then there's a large body of research that suggests or documents how unstructured play, creative play, role-playing, storytelling, all of these things really have a profound effect on strengthening executive functioning skills. I give a whole talk on executive functioning skills, so I could really spend hours talking about executive functioning, but you know, executive functioning skills are those such as planning, organization, regulation of emotion, working memory, the ability to shift from one task to another. So those are all skills that really have been shown to really be positively impacted by play. And so again, when we think about the impact of technology on our children's development, we need to think, how is technology changing the nature or the frequency by which our kids are playing? So if they're playing, if their play has now become you know, constantly on the phone or on a screen, that's going to really dramatically change, you know, the nature of how they're playing. So we need to just be mindful of that. All right, so some things about the brain I just want to quickly go over. So when a child is born, they have some basic neuronal connections. In those early childhood years, the brain just goes through a really, really rapid development. There's so many more branches, neurons, connections that are occurring as kids get exposed to so many different things in the environment. And then in those early teen years, what starts to happen is something called neuronal pruning. So the brain is really preparing for that adult phase of development. The brain is sort of shedding or pruning the branches that are not being used, and they're strengthening the branches that are being used over and over and over again. So it is kind of a use it or lose it phase of development. And when I first heard this, I kind of got scared as a parent. Oh my God, what parts of the brain of my kids are getting pruned or sort of withering away. Good thing is that there's still a lot of plasticity and changes that can occur later in life and throughout life for that matter. But childhood and adolescence is a really, really rapid, important time in development. So again, if a child is spending all of their time on video games or technology, the parts of the brain that they're using are going to get more strengthened, right? And the parts that they're not using are going to kind of be pruned away. The other thing is myelination. So the branches that are left or remaining are covered with this sort of fatty sheath called myelin, and that just helps information sort of transfer more quickly and more efficiently through various parts of the brain. The other thing that is happening is in a pathway called the dopamine pathway, and this is the system that is primarily responsible for pleasure or that drive for reward or sort of positive reinforcement. This part of the brain is most active during adolescence. So at no other time in a child's life or an adult's life is this pathway more active. And this is really, really important because I think this is why things like social media and video games are so appealing to some kids, because they really do sort of exploit or tap into this this drive for reward. Think about social media where you're clicking the likes and the hearts, and every time you do that, you get a sort of a little shot of dopamine. Or the video games where kids are getting coins or whatever, virtual bucks or whatever it is. And that just keeps them engaged in that particular task. So it's a very, very, I think a lot of, tech companies are, some have actually, admitted to sort of really exploiting that system as a way to get more kids sort of, involved in their particular product. So let's talk a little bit about technology use statistics. We've seen really, really, significant increase over the last decade in terms of how much access kids have to technology. These are just some of the statistics that I was able to pull from various research sources. But nearly 75% of children now have access to a smartphone, whether it be their own or a parent's. 30%, 30% basic phone. Teenagers are going online very frequently throughout the day, several times a day, almost constantly. 55% of teens spend time every day texting with friends, so it has become a very, very important communication tool amongst peers. Screen use statistics, so 0 to 2-year-olds about an hour and 15 minutes per day, 2 to 5-year-olds about 3 hours and 9 minutes a day, 6 to 8-year-olds about 3 hours and 41 minutes a day. On average, teens spend 8+ hours a day using some form of digital media device, and that also includes time during the school. So that's why that number is high. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of use of technology even in the academic environment now as well. Children from lower income families tend to have spend greater amounts of time online, and that's or on screens, and that's really a product of you know, a number of different things, but perhaps you know, single parents working maybe, or you know, or joint parents who maybe are having to work 2 or 3 jobs, and kids are home alone, and so oftentimes devices can serve as babysitters. Other times, you know, lower income families are living in communities that are not necessarily safe to sort of go outside and play because of community violence or stuff like that. And so it's viewed as sort of a safer option. Here's another just graphical chart demonstrating media device ownership amongst 12 to 17-year-olds. You can see that nearly half, you know, of these owners have smartphones. Many have access to computers, and of course video games. Those are the other high ones. So in talking about technology, I really do like to take a balanced approach, because it really, as much as we as parents and teachers, we would love technology to go away, it's really not. It's really a part of our life, for better or for worse. And so we need to think about both the challenges or concerns, but also the benefits, because there are definitely some benefits related to technology. So with regards to social media and social networking, it definitely helps to expand a child's social circle. Diversifies a child's social circle. So they're connecting with other kids who are not just from the neighborhood. They're maybe connecting with other people in different parts of the state or the country, or even internationally. And it also increases the breadth and depth of information of all kinds that are really out there, and that can really enhance learning. There is a concept called the rich get richer hypothesis, and this means that with relationships, technology can help to augment or strengthen prior relationships. So if a teen had a relationship with a peer, an existing relationship, they might use technology as sort of another way to deepen or to strengthen their relationship, to communicate with that friend. Also to keep in contact. Let's say that friend moves away to another city. It is a way to sort of maintain those relationships. Certainly during pandemic, right, where our kids are not able to be physically present with their friends, oftentimes social media has been one way of keeping in contact with friends. There's also what's called the social compensation hypothesis. So technology can be used to compensate for certain conditions or predispositions or personality issues, like being more introverted or shy, socially anxious, etc. Social support. So kids that maybe identify or belong to a group that is maybe a minority status or marginalized in some way, or they don't feel like there are other kids out there like them. It can be used as a way to connect, to find safe spaces, to find a community of other kids who can relate to maybe something that they're going through, whether it be an illness or a disability or some identity variable. It can also create a platform by which kids really begin to exercise and develop their identities, right? And so we've seen this with, several prominent teens who have become activists, around gun violence or around water conservation or climate control, climate issues. They've used social media as a platform to really get passionate and raise awareness and facilitate youth voice as part of these important social issues. Some other benefits include access to or sharing of information. So it can really enhance or supplement the learning that is occurring both inside and outside of the classroom, right? So they can take a concept that's being learned or read about in class, and they can search online for, what is going on in another part of the world around this particular topic. Let's pull up a YouTube video about an interview with somebody who's speaking about this issue in their experience. So it really can deepen the learning that's occurring academically. It can be leveraged also as a tool to create. And I think this is a really important point here for parents to really think about. Are your kids using technology in a very passive way? So are they sort of sitting down, sitting in front of YouTube and watching YouTube videos passively? Or are they using it as a tool to exercise that creative thinking, that complex thinking, that is a developmental task, particularly of adolescence? It can also allow children to learn or work at their own pace. So we've seen this with a number of academic software curriculums, right, where kids can maybe answer some questions, math problems, or whatnot, and the curriculums will help determine, okay, what level is this child at? And then we'll give the children questions that help them master where they are and then gradually move them up. So it can really help them meet kids where they are academically. And of course, technology is not going away, no matter how much we sometimes struggle with our kids around these things. We need to really expose them to technology, and we need to talk with them and teach them how to use them effectively and safely, because it's going to become more and more a part of their world. All right, so some of the challenges now. So let's talk about the negatives. So time alone, downtime. Our brains really, really need downtime to process, to integrate the learning that we've encountered throughout our day. The primary mechanism by which we get this is through sleep. And we've also seen some research suggesting that sleep, the amount of sleep that teens are getting, has also been gradually decreasing over the years. So I just always remind parents that middle school age kids should be getting about 8 to 10 hours a night of sleep. So I know my son, who is just finishing eighth grade, is constantly telling me that he can stay up later and it doesn't really matter. And but it really does impact his ability to sort of function and really consolidate and integrate all the information that he's been exposed to during the day. There are some YouTube clips in the presentation that just because we're doing this virtually, I'm not going to be showing, but when I send them out to you, you can click on them and review them at your leisure. Because identity development is so key to middle school age and high school aged youth, it's also really important to think about how social media can impact that process, right? So when you're thinking about such a public forum like social media where you're constantly being watched or observed by other people, that is going to impact how you portray yourself. You're going to be concerned, or you're going to sort of be curating your profile, right? And we need to ask ourselves, how is that really impacting my child's ability to really deepen and explore their identity in a really meaningful way? Technology also impacts parent-child relationships. Typically as parents or guardians, we have generally, we have the power, the control in our homes, right? And we as parents are sort of charged with keeping our kids safe and monitoring them and supervising them. But the nature of technology has somewhat changed our ability to do that. So now so much of a child's life or an individual's life is really being held in the palm of their hand. So unless we are there beside our kids at all times, sort of watching what they're accessing or who they're talking with, we don't always know what our kids are doing. So it does sort of create some challenges, I think, around how to monitor or to stay engaged with what is going on in our kids' lives. Similarly, that hierarchy of authority, it sometimes flips the script. My kids, I mean, I've learned so much from my kids about technology. They've taught me about different apps and different, video game platforms and all of these things that I had no clue about. And so it really puts parents in this position of maybe not knowing as much as our kids. And so we really, as parents, need to stay informed the best we can about what our kids are accessing and what sort of platforms they're using. It can also create fear and anxiety, so I mean, I think we can all attest to this, particularly in the recent weeks around this George Floyd police killing. It's a nonstop, on our social media feeds, and it does create stress and anxiety when we're viewing particularly traumatic videos, etc., of some of these incidents. Particularly, if you're from a historically oppressed or marginalized group that has a history of trauma or have experienced, racism or those sorts of things, it can be incredibly re-triggering to see these things online. Cyberbullying is another issue. 23% of teens report being cyberbullied at some point. And when we think about bullying, bullying has a profound impact on kids' emotional health. And then when you add on top of that technology and how broadly posts can reach, somebody who is cyberbullying another peer could post something, and within seconds it's transmitted through the entire school or community, and that can really significantly impact emotional health. Pornography, depending upon the research article you're reading, there's a lot of variation, but anywhere from 23 to 95% of 10 to 19-year-olds have reported viewing pornography online. So again, at a time in development where kids are learning how to be sexual, they're becoming more intimate, you're learning how to do that. we need to ask ourselves as parents and as adults, how are our kids learning about this? And then sexting is another issue related, to social media use, inappropriate use of technology to express sexuality. Again, kids putting things out there, not really thinking fully through the consequences of, consent, putting stuff out there that gets posted or that can be posted. You think you're texting somebody in private, but the next thing you know, it is, online. So definitely important to have conversations with kids as they develop, as they grow, about these really important issues and the potential consequences. Again, as we go back to the slide on the brain, that dopamine system, that pleasure-seeking system is super active during adolescence. And so kids are less motivated by the consequences. They're not necessarily thinking about the negative consequences of their actions. They're more concerned about, or they're more driven because of what's happening in the brain to that positive pleasure sensation. There's also been a lot of research on multitasking. So, having your cell phone out, trying to do homework, having YouTube going on your computer. People think that they can multitask, but research after research study after research study shows that we do not function, we do not perform as well when we are multitasking. And so it's really important to teach our kids the importance of sort of focusing and attending to one thing at a time. We're so connected, we're so technology driven right now that that there's so much information coming at us. And so we need to sort of train our minds and our brains to really focus on one thing at a time. I'm not going to go too much into the research on this, but there's been studies around even having background TV noise and the impact on play. So they've studied parent-child dyads, for instance, kids who, in situations where there's like background TV noise, the child is focusing or attending less to one particular toy, versus if the TV is off, they will focus for a longer period of time on that particular task. And similarly with parent-child interactions, they're much shorter when there's background noise going on than when you're actually sitting and playing in a quiet room. So there's sort of lots and lots of research out there, and I'd be happy to, if anybody has any follow-up questions about that, you can reach out to me afterwards. University students, etc., we definitely see lots of research on the impact on grades and academic functioning with increased multitasking. One of the biggest areas of concern here is that technology displaces other important aspects of life. So it may not be that technology itself is inherently bad, but it does draw kids in for lengthy periods of time. It's very easy to sit down at a video game and hours later you're still doing it because of how compelling it is. And what that does, of course, is that it displaces other things, right? So like unstructured play, like family time, playing games together as a family, talking together as a family, hanging out with kids outside, exercising, all of these things that kids really need in order to thrive. It can also create this illusion that they're connected, right? So they're getting little texts here and there from friends, or that maybe they have 100 friends on Facebook, but does that really mean that we're connected in a meaningful way, that we're having the sorts of deep relationships that are needed for kids to experience and for kids to learn and develop how to be in relationship with other people? I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health right now and some of the statistics. Again, we don't yet know if it's a causal relationship, but we definitely see a correlational relationship here. So over the last, decade or so, maybe a little longer, we've seen an uptick in the suicide rates for both males and females. And we've seen a very recent study that came out looking at African American youth, and some staggering increases in suicide rates as well. Depression rates, we've seen those continue to also increase over the last, at least a decade. Some of where the research is going now is researchers are trying to figure out, well, okay, so we know that there's this correlational relationship between technology use and potential impact on well-being, but what are the limits here? What are the what's an okay amount for kids to be on some form of technology or device? And so this was a large-scale study of 15-year-olds in the UK, 120,000 15-year-olds. So it's one of the larger studies out there that are looking at this. And they measured well-being by giving a lot of different surveys around happiness, life satisfaction, psychological functioning, social functioning. And they surveyed kids to ask, about their technology use patterns. And there are, of course, different ways of using technology. You can be video gaming, you could be watching TV or films, you could be web surfing, reading, emailing, smartphone, social media, text. So there's different categories here. And so they were, as researchers, trying to determine what's the threshold at which this causes well-being to start to decrease. And the data here suggests that there's a weekday threshold and there's a weekend threshold. So of course, during the week, our kids are in school, so a lot of their time is being taken by being physically in schools. And so they have kind of the evenings or after school times left, whereas on the weekends you don't often have school, so you have a lot more time to do other things, right? And so for certain types of media consumption, like video gaming, the weekday threshold, for instance, was 1 hour and 40 minutes. So after that period of time, kids started to report decreases in well-being. Versus, let's see, to give you another example, web surfing, reading an email on weekdays were 4 hours and 17 minutes. Now, you need to think about the nature of those types of technology platforms. When you're video gaming, you're typically super locked in. You're very focused on the game, and you're not really able to do other things. You're not even taking bathroom breaks. Usually, you're just going and you're playing. With web surfing, reading, and emailing, you're often it's a little less structured. You might be stepping away, grabbing a snack, maybe having a conversation with your parent, or, and so the threshold at which kids start to have a negative impact is a longer period of time. So I hope that makes sense. I'm happy to answer some questions about that if you do have any later. Actually, this might be a good time just to pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions. I'm just going to open the chat really quickly and see if there's any questions there. Oh, there's somebody here from Sydney, Australia. Wow, thank you for attending. But there are no questions at this time, so I'm going to keep going. And then at the end, I will again check the chat for questions. All right, so we're going to move into strategies or recommendations. So what to do, how do we help kids? First of all, as parents, as teachers, as adults in kids' life, we really need to talk about technology. We need to sit down with them, help children understand the benefits as well as the limitations and concerns of technology. One of my favorite websites for this sort of thing is commonsense.org. It is really my go-to website as a parent and as a clinician to really understand the many, many nuances of the impact of technology on kids. It's also a great place, like if your child is on a particular app and you have no clue what this app is, or is it safe or not, or you can really get that specific level of detail about whatever your child is wanting to use. I often go there if my child wants to download a particular app or social media thing. I go there and I do some research about it first, and then I sit down with them and talk with whether or not it's a go or a no-go. Balance. We need to help kids balance being active versus passive consumers of technology. Remember what kids need developmentally. They're learning how to be creative thinkers, to be abstract thinkers, to be logical thinkers, and is technology that they're doing or that they're using helping to strengthen those skills. Downtime. We need to help kids have downtime or alone time when they're able to really sort of quietly introspect, have less or low distractions. You can do this in a number of different ways. You can, as a family, you can sit down and create times during the day where you're going to be screen free. So a lot of families like to have rules around, meal time is a time where we're just sitting down as a family. We are not going to be on our phones. Kids must have maybe a certain amount of time to have unstructured play with friends or exercise. Mindful meditation is a practice that I like to use, and I've taught my kids too, how to do that sort of technique to just give our minds a little bit of a break and a little retreat from all the stimulation that comes with technology. Similarly, somewhat related, is designating a screen-free zone or times or zones in the house. So bedrooms, technology is off limits. 1 hour before bedtime, we're disconnecting, those sorts of things. Sometimes it's hard when your kids are obviously not during quarantine, but when kids are going to each other's houses and spending time, you don't necessarily know what's happening in terms of technology, so making sure to communicate with the other adults or caregivers so that you're all on the same page about that as well. So, because our project with the district is really very mindfulness based, I do want to talk a little bit about mindfulness. There's been a lot of research that has supported mindfulness as a practice that helps with emotion regulation, with strengthening attention. Mindfulness is a way of being very intentional about pausing, about being still, about noticing whatever's there without judgment. And I want to just very briefly lead you through a 3-minute activity, just to give you a feel for some of the activities that we teach the kids in the groups that we're running. This is called the 3-minute breathing space, and it's one of the techniques that is part of the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy curriculum. So I would love it if you would join me for a moment. If you could just sort of sit in a very intentional posture, maybe head up towards the ceiling a little bit. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And the best you can, shift your attention and focus to your thoughts. Just notice what's there in your mind. Your emotions. So checking in with whatever feelings you may be sitting with in this moment, whether it be one emotion or multiple emotions. And then shift your focus to your body sensation. So how is your body feeling right now? Noticing perhaps your back on the chair, or your feet on the floor, or your hands in your lap. What does that feel like? And then the best you can, we're going to shift our focus and our attention to our breathing. So notice the sensations of breathing, the rise and fall of your chest or your belly. Just rest your attention on any part of the body. It could be your nostrils, it could be your chest, it could be your belly. It helps you focus on your breathing. So just do that for a moment. And now, in the last step, you're going to allow your attention to focus and to expand outward to your entire body, around your breath, focusing on your skin, maybe noticing that the temperature of your skin, the feeling of your clothes on your body. Just bring a sense of openness and expansiveness to your experience in this moment. Notice what it's feeling like to sitting in this room, to be doing this activity together. And when you're ready, just slowly open your eyes, coming back to the session. So, of course, these are kids that we're working with at the 2 middle schools, and they don't have very lengthy attention spans. So we really do focus on teaching these really brief strategies as a way to introduce them to the concepts of mindfulness. And then we spend some time talking about, well, what was that like? How would you apply this to your life? Many kids start, talk about maybe using this in class in moments where they're feeling overwhelmed, or at night when they're having trouble sleeping. So when we think about mindfulness and technology, um, I am actually going to show you one video clip, and this is from a video of a YouTube clip rather that shows you an example of how mindfulness might be applied to technology use. I'm just going to stop sharing the presentation for one moment while I pull up this quick YouTube video. All right, so that was an example of sort of how you might apply the concept of mindfulness to sending an email. We are such an instantaneous sort of culture right now with technology and texting, and we have this illusion that everything needs to sort of happen so very quickly and very impulsively. And you can see how that can really get people into trouble, if they're not really being intentional about their use of technology. What do they want? What do they really want to say in an email? What do they really want to communicate in that text? Um, Thinking about how the communication is going to be received by the recipient. Teaching kids that if it's not urgent or not crucial that they send something impulsively, to just take a moment, take a breath, and think about what you really want to achieve in this interaction can really help use technology in a more mindful way. Some other recommendations. So adults can definitely model for their kids. So kids are watching us as adults, as parents. They're watching us how we use our phones, how we use social media. So it's very important that we set an example for our kids. managing cell phone use with technology. So this is something that I talk with a lot of my parents that I work with in my clinical practice. You know, if you're going to provide your middle schooler with a cell phone, for instance, I really do recommend that you've really thought through how you're going to sort of monitor and limit the use of the device. I always recommend starting with a high degree of control, and then as kids demonstrate maturity and ability to use the device safely over time throughout their adolescence, gradually giving them a little bit more you know, autonomy. But it's always, I've seen so many situations where parents give kids phones and don't have the limits in place and don't have the structure in place, and then pulling it back is so very hard and causes a lot of conflict. So there are, I mean, there's certainly ways to program your kids' phones, screen time limits, etc. There are other apps or technologies that you can download that allow you to control your kids' phones remotely, or limit, you know, certain apps or the times of days that certain apps are active. So there are some really important, you know, parental control strategies out there. So I really recommend that you do your research. The American Academy of Pediatrics has also put out a lot of recommendations around technology. So here are just some of those recommendations. So they're really recommending that for really young kids under age 18 months, really to avoid screen media use, just because of where their brains are and what they can understand and not understand, and what they need developmentally. 18 to 24 months, if you want to introduce digital media, make sure you're sitting with your child, you're selecting high quality programming, and you're watching it with your child to help them understand what they're seeing. 2 to 5-year-olds, limit screen use to about an hour a day of high quality programs. Encourage to co-view with your child if possible. 6 and older, you know, identify some firm limits, about 2 hours, maybe, or an hour of limits on social media or media use, or types of technology use. Teens, you need to think about some of the other things, like 2 hours of sedentary screen time per day as the limit, and making sure that they're getting enough sleep, moderate exercise. And there is a media use plan that's available on the American Academy of Pediatrics website as well, to help you and your family have these conversations about rules and limits, and what, you know, how your family is going to approach technology in the home. And finally, I just always like to review how to seek professional help, how to know when your child needs professional help. If you've seen any major impairments in functioning, whether it be at school or socially, or changes in emotions that have persisted for you know, a period of time of several weeks or more, that may be a sign that they may need some help. You know, right now during quarantine, we've seen a lot of kids really struggling with their emotions. They're grieving, they're not, you know, being able to be involved in their activities that they typically enjoy. They're not connecting with friends regularly in person. And that is taking a toll on kids. But, you know, we've been at this now for a couple of months at least. And, you know, if your teen is still, you know, seeming down or worried or nervous about this situation, it may be time to check in with a professional. Really in the school-based setting, at least in terms of our program, you may be asked to complete a checklist or a behavior checklist to help gather information so that we understand what your child may be going through, and that'll help us figure out what sort of supports to offer. Definitely talk with your child, have conversations. involve them in the decision. They're at that age where they're wanting a little bit more control over what happens to them. So they may be wanting to be a part of that decision. Parental involvement in treatment, so making sure that you're also a participant so that you're learning strategies and you can support those strategies in the home setting. The Community Mental Health Board of Oak Park has commissioned a website called Health Connection Hub where you can research local community resources that are available. Of course, speaking with your pediatrician as well about whether to seek services. D97 can also, students can text the word HOPE to this number as well, and that'll connect them directly to a trained mental health professional. This is particularly helpful in moments of crisis. So I just wanted to share some of those resources. When you have a moment, I will email this link out to you afterwards. Please do take a few moments to complete a very, very, very brief evaluation, just so we know your experience with talks like this one and get some feedback on what you'd like to see or anything different in the future. Again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or need any resources. And this is my email address. I want to thank you for participating. I am going to stop sharing right now and then see if there's any more questions in the chat bar. All right. So it seems like technology has been crucial to connect with friends during quarantine. Playing online games has been a way to connect. Are the limits you went over a good time frame during this pandemic, or should we be more lenient? Yeah, so that's a really good question and point right now. Right now we're going through something very, very unique, and our kids are not able to be in regular physical proximity to each other right now. So what I ask parents to do is just to really reflect on what is the purpose or what is the technology being used for? Is it a way that kids are maintaining their friendships and their connections during this time? And if the answer is yes, I would say be more lenient during this time for sure. But then also remember the other things that kids need developmentally. So, with my own kids, I, ask them to do at least something physical once a day, whether it be like, riding their bike around for a little bit, or, walking the dog, or, playing some basketball outside, just so that they're not, online with friends all day. To which organization does the HOPE text number connect to? So I'm not quite sure about that, but it is a service that the Oak Park Township Community Mental Health Board has commissioned. And I'm not exactly sure where the trained mental health professionals actually reside in terms of what organization, but I can try and find that out for you and get back to you. If you want to send me an email, so just so I have your contact information, I'd be happy to look into that for you. All right. Any final questions before we end? Great. Well, thank you so much for attending, and I hope you all have a great night and a really safe and enjoyable summer. We do have one more talk next week on depression, but one of my other colleagues, Dr. Dubé, will be doing that one. But thank you so much. Have a great night.